Okay, now that we got all the technical issues out of the way and we are all here, thank you so much, everybody being patient. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what that issue was, but we're all here together. So let's jump into Parshas Toldos. So now we leave, huh? Now we leave the story of Avram and Sarah, and we go to the next generation of Yitzchak and Rivka. But I want to speak today about the drama between in Rivka's pregnancy with Eisav and Yaakov, and the age-old question I want to address. And I've actually addressed this in this year from different perspectives and different commentaries. The underlying misunderstanding or dispute between Yitzchak and Rivka over which child gets the blessings. And there's lots of different commentaries on this. And the obvious question that everybody asks is, it seems like it's obvious who gets the blessings. It's so obvious from us reading the story thousands of years later. It seems so clear and just without any doubt that Yaakov is clearly the one who is meant to be the spiritual inheritor of the mantle of Yitzchak and Avram. And yet, for some reason, we see, as the Torah describes, Yitzchak loves Eisav. The Rivka heveses Yaakov. And Rivka loves Yaakov. Now, it doesn't mean they didn't love the other son, but obviously, what the Torah is referring to is they see this is the one that will be the spiritual inheritor. This is the one that is deserving of all of these brachas. And again, the obvious question is, how could Yitzchak make this mistake? It wasn't like Eisav was a difficult character to read, even though Rashi tells us, and Rashi takes this from Torah Shebaal Peh, that Yitzchak tried to fool his father, pretend he was more religious than he actually was, and he would ask his father questions on how to give meiser on salt and how to give meiser on straw. And but that explanation, just a simple explanation that Yitzchak was somehow fooled by this, it doesn't make sense. It leads us to believe that Yitzchak was some kind of, I don't know, not with it, not understanding, not perceiving who his children really were. Yitzchak was a navi. Our avos and our imos were neviim. They understood neshamas. It doesn't make sense that Yitzchak was fooled by Esav's questions of how do I take meiser on salt. What was it that Yitzchak saw that he wanted to give the brachas, the mantle of spiritual leadership, which is what those brachas represented, to Eisav? How do we understand this dispute between Yitzchak and Rivka? Even more, the question becomes even stronger when we see in the beginning of our parsha, when Rivka is struggling in her pregnancy, she goes to inquire from Hashem, which means she goes to the yeshiva Shem Be'ever and acquires from the spiritual leader of that generation, which was Shem, who is a Navi. And she asks him, what does Hashem want from me? And Shem tells her, the struggle that you're experiencing in your womb is because you're carrying twins. But Shem also tells her that Rav Yavai Tzeir, that the younger one will be greater. That the older one of the twins, Rav Yavai Tzeir, the older one will serve the younger. Seemingly implying that the younger is the spiritual giant of the two. And the Rav, the older one, Yavai, will serve Tzeir, the younger one. So the Navi tells Rivka this explicitly. It's hard to fathom, and it's beyond belief that Rivka would not share that with Yitzchak. Seemingly, she did share that with Yitzchak. And if she shared that with Yitzchak, then how could Yitzchak have any question? Rav Yavai Tzeir is clearly saying the older will serve the younger. So it's obvious and it's clear that the younger Yaakov is the one who deserves the brachas. And yet, notwithstanding that statement from the Navi, Yitzchak wants to give the brachas to Eisav. And why? Why does the Torah say? And this is also perplexing. The Torah gives a reason why Yitzchak loves Eisav. Ki tzayid b'fiv.
He gives him meat.
His trappings. Yitzchak was a hunter. His trappings were in Yitzchak's mouth. In other words, Eisav fed his father good steak. So because of a good steak, because of a good prime rib, he wants to give the brachas to Eisav. It doesn't even make sense. That doesn't fall in line with everything we understand and everything we know about our avos and our imais. They weren't Bali Taiva Bagashmias like that. That Yitzchak's ready to completely give away all of the brachas for a good steak. It makes no sense. But the Torah says it explicitly. Ki tzayid b'fiv. So how do we understand this? So obviously, there must be a deeper level of understanding. I just silenced everybody, so yeah. So okay. So let's try to understand this, and perhaps we're meant to look at this story in a completely different manner than we've looked at it in the past. Perhaps the Torah is telling us something incredibly profound and a very powerful lesson in this whole story. And perhaps we're looking at it through incorrect lenses. See, our lenses, when we just read it at a superficial level, it seems that somehow Yitzchak is fooled by Eisav. And we're reading it from the perspective of hindsight, where it's obvious who Eisav is. It's obvious who Yaakov. How could Yitzchak be fooled is our question. But what if Yitzchak wasn't fooled at all? What if, in fact, Yitzchak knew exactly who his children were, which seemingly makes more sense? Again, Yitzchak was not just a father; he was a navi. He was a tzaddik. It doesn't make sense he didn't know who his children were. Perhaps he knew exactly who they were, and perhaps he knew exactly what he was doing. And he specifically wanted to give the brachas to Eisav. The navi said, "Rav yavot seir," that the older will serve the younger. How do we understand that? Kitzayed b'fiv. How do we understand that? That he loved Eisav because Eisav's meat was in his mouth. Eisav's trappings, his huntings were in Yitzchak's mouth. So I want to share with you an explanation that I think gives us a deeper insight here. And this explanation is really based, for those of you who have come to the Tanya Shiur on Thursdays, who have learned Tanya in the past, the Tanya gives us a really beautiful insight into this. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya is the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe's, his path in Avodas Hashem. And it's 53 chapters of basically a systematic method in Avodas Hashem and in bringing out the greatest potential in every one of us. And the Alter Rebbe has a thesis that the whole Tanya is based upon. And his thesis is as follows: that every Jew can be divided up into one of three categories. You have the perfect tzaddik. You have the tzaddikim, let's say. The tzaddikim are, as the Alter Rebbe describes, the tzaddik gamor is somebody who no longer battles with his Yetzer Hara. The tzaddik gamor is somebody who has not only defeated and vanquished his Yetzer Hara, but has totally and completely transformed it so that it becomes like a second Yetzer Tov. That his animal soul is no longer desiring animalistic physical desires, but his animal soul becomes like a second godly soul. And so this tzaddik no longer battles with all of the issues that us regular people battle with: anger, jealousy, taivas, all of the negative inclinations that we're born with, that we develop, that are part of our nature. The tzaddik has completely transformed those. Now, the Alter Rebbe describes that this tzaddik is incredibly rare. There's only really a handful in a generation, if that. That the vast, vast majority of us not only are not at this level, but can never reach that level. That's actually not even the goal for most of us, says the Alter Rebbe. That level, to obtain that level, to have the potential to become the tzaddik, is a complete gift from above that Hashem gives to certain neshamas. But the vast, vast, vast majority of us, we're strugglers. We're battlers. We have a Yetzer Hara, we have an animal soul, we have negative inclinations, we have our nature that we're constantly battling with. And this category, the Alter Rebbe says, is the Beinoni. And the Beinoni is the vast majority of us. We have an animal soul, we have a godly soul, we have a Yetzer Hara, we have a Yetzer Tov, and the goal of the Beinoni is to reach a level, and this is our goal, not to vanquish our Yetzer Hara. That's impossible. We're going to live with that until our last breath. But to overcome it, to never allow it to be manifest. So the Yetzer Hara is inside. I'm still battling internally, but externally, in my thought, speech, and action, which is how the soul manifests itself, how the soul expresses itself, externally, it's only my godly soul that's in control. I'm able to have basically behavior control. To reach the pinnacle of total behavior control. That's the highest level most of us can reach, and that's what we battle with our whole lives. And this is an Avodas Hashem. That's an entire lifetime to learn to have behavior control in thought, in speech, and in action. And then you have the third category, somebody who's completely succumbed to his nefesh habahamis, to his Yetzer Hara, and that's the Rasha, where all of the good has completely been buried within it. And that's also a very rare level. Most of us are in this middle ground. Now, that's a summary, basically, and a thumbnail of Tanya. And the Alter Rebbe gives us, throughout the 52 chapters of Tanya, how to achieve this level of Beinoni. But the point here for this year is, if that's the case, what's the purpose of the Tzaddik Gamor? What's his purpose in life? The whole purpose, as we know, is Avodas HaBirurim, right? To elevate ourselves, to refine ourselves by serving Hashem, by doing the mitzvahs, by learning Torah, rectify and refine the world. But the tzaddik is completely self-refined. The tzaddik no longer battles. He's not elevating his Yetzer Hara. It's done. So what's his purpose? What's the purpose of the tzaddik? I mean, we could ask my wife. But for the rest of us, what is our purpose? If what is the purpose of the tzaddik? For us, we know what our purpose is. We're the Beinanim. We're striving for behavior control. But the tzaddik who's reached it, what's his purpose? And in fact, the Tanya, the name that the Alter Rebbe gave the Tanya was Sefer Shel Beinanim. This is the book for the Beinanim. This is the path. And in fact, the Alter Rebbe wrote a Sefer Shel Tzadikim, an entire book devoted to the Avodah, to answering this question: what's the Avodah of the tzaddik? What is his purpose? What's his Avodah? What's his mission? If he's no longer battling a Yetzer Hara, he's no longer battling an animal soul. And the Sefer Shel Tzadikim was burned in a fire, and the Alter Rebbe took that as a sign from above not to publish it, and so we lost it. We don't have it. But basically, the Tzaddik Gomer's purpose is to be a dugma chaya, a living inspiration for the rest of us. An example, a living example, so that we have a tangible living example of what we are, of what we can strive to be. Now, we may never reach that level. We won't reach that level. But at least it gives us an example of what we're striving towards, what our goals are, what our tachlis is, what our purpose is. To strive to reach this picture as much as we can. That's why many people have in their homes pictures of tzaddikim. The whole point of pictures of tzaddikim, again, is to remind us, this is an inspiration for me. This is what I'm striving to live towards. This is what I want my life to look like. No, I may never get there exactly. But there's a Tana Devilio that says every one of us has an obligation to ask, when are my actions, Masai, Maisa Yada, Yegil, Maisa Avais, when are my actions going to reach the level of the Avais? And I saw an explanation. It doesn't mean actually reach the level. None of us can reach the level of the others. But Yagia could also mean not only reach, but touch. When can we at least touch that? That's our inspiration. So that Tzaddik Gomor lives in the world to be a spiritual guide, a living example, a dugma chai of everything that we are able to be, of everything that we are meant to be. An example of this that we could connect to is Shabbos. Shabbos gives us a kedusha that is me'ein olam haba. And one of the reasons why, there's many reasons why Hashem gives us Shabbos. But one of the reasons why, and this is the reason why Shabbos is the end of the week, it's the tachlis, it's the end, it's the ultimate purpose of what our week is meant to be. We're meant to elevate the world to the point where we get to Yom Shekulei Shabbos, which is Mashiach, which will be every day will be like Shabbos. So at the end of the week, Hashem shows us and gives us a day imbued with Kedusha, imbued with holiness, to show us a concrete example of this is what we're working for an entire week. This is the end. This is the purpose. That's what we say on Shabbos, Vayichulu es hashamayim ves haaretz, which means we say in Kiddush that Hashem concluded creating. Vayichulu means Hashem ended or concluded creation. But Vayichulu is also the same etymology, the same root as the word tachlis. This is the entire purpose of Shemayim v'aretz. This is the entire purpose of everything we work for during the week. And so Shabbos is like the tzaddik of the weekdays, so to speak. Shabbos gives us an example of what we're working towards. And so along those lines, perhaps Yitzchak saw the relationship of Yaakov and Eisav in a similar way. Yaakov was the tzaddik and Eisav was the Beinoni. Yaakov was meant to be the living example of what we're striving to reach. But the vast majority of us are not the tzaddik. The vast majority of us are the strugglers. And Eisav was the struggler. And so Yaakov was meant to be the living example for what Eisav was struggling to reach. And that's why the Torah describes. Yaakov was the Yeshiv Oil. Yaakov sat and learned Torah all day. He didn't live in the world. The first 63 years of Yaakov's life, he studied Torah in his parents' home. He was a perfect tzaddik. He didn't battle with the world. He didn't struggle in life. He was ensconced in holiness. He wasn't living in the real world. He wasn't battling with the Yetzer Hara. He wasn't battling with an animal soul. He's just imbued and ensconced in complete Kedusha. He was the living example of a human being filled with holiness, and who has reached the epitome of holiness. Eisav, on the other hand, was all of us. He was the struggler. He had a Yetzer Hara. He had taivas. He lived in the real world. He went out and was a hunter. The real Avodas Hashem, perhaps, was meant to be done by Eisav, the struggler, to reach his potential, to overcome his Nefesh Bahamas. And Yaakov was meant to be the living example, the inspiration for Eisav. And that's why it says when Yaakov is born, he's Yada Echezes Eikav, the Eikav Eisav. His hand was holding on to the heel of Eisav. He was the heel's the end. He was supposed to be the end of what Eisav was supposed to be. He's Eisav at the end of the story. How Eisav was supposed to elevate himself and refine himself. And therefore Yaakov is defined. Yeah, the name Yaakov means, it comes from the word Eikev, which means end. The end is the tachlis, the purpose of it all, just like Shabbos is the end of the week. Because Shabbos is the tachlis of everything. Shabbos is the end, so to speak, the end story of what the weekday is supposed to be like. Yaakov was the end story, so to speak, of what Eisav was meant to reach. But the real Avodas Hashem, the real Avodas HaBirurim, the overcoming of the Nefesh Bahamas, that battle that we all struggle with every day, that was meant to be Eisav. And perhaps when the Navi said, Rav Yavait Seir, that the older will serve the younger, maybe the Navi meant something else. Maybe the Navi meant Rav Yavait, the older one, will be Yavait. He will be the one who's engaged in Avodas Hashem to be able to reach the level of Seir, the younger one. That's what the Navi's saying. That the older one is Yavait. He's the one who's going to be engaged in Avodas Hashem to reach the level of the Seir. And so therefore, Yaakov didn't need the Brochos. Yaakov was already the perfect tzaddik. Eisav was the one who needed the Brochos. We're the ones who need the Brochos. The struggler is the one who needs the Brochos to refine him, to elevate him. Yitzchak understood. Esav's the one who needs the Brochos. And all of this would have been. This is perhaps exactly how it meant to play out. Yaakov and Eisav were partners were going to be partners in establishing Yiddishkeit. Eisav would represent the vast majority of us, and Yaakov would represent the tzaddikim gemurim, the perfect tzaddikim. And that's perhaps exactly how it meant to play itself out. But Esav's fatal flaw, as the story tells, as we hear the story and we read the story, what happens? Eisav gives up. Hine anoichi heilech lamus. I am going to die. He comes in from the field and he says, I'm going to die. What is he saying? Right? In this whole story where he sells his Bechor to Yaakov, right? He's going to die, comes in exhausted, he's going to die. Yaakov feeds him for the Bechor. And what does Eisav say? What does Eisav say? He says, Lama zeh li Bechor. Why do I need this Bechor? The Bechor represents, what's Bechor? The Rashis, the beginning. The Bechor represents the beginning of Avodas Hashem, the battle, the struggle. Yaakov is the end, the Eikev, the Tachlis, becoming the Tzaddik Gomer, becoming the highest spiritual level we can reach. Yaakov represents the end. Esav's the beginning. And Eisav says, Lama zeh, what do I need this for? The struggle is too much. The struggle, the spirit, the constant battle, the internal battle of striving to be good, of trying to be my best, and yet dealing with my animal soul and my nefesh Bahamas, because the loftier one's godly soul is, the stronger one's animal soul is. And this dovetails with what the Alter Rebbe says, and the Alter Rebbe has very deep Hasidic discourses on each parsha, with very, very deep Hasidic concepts. And in one of these parshas, in one of these Maimorim in Parshas Toldos, the Alter Rebbe describes the spiritual root between a difference in the spiritual roots between Yaakov and Eisav. And the Alter Rebbe says that Eisav has a higher spiritual source than Yaakov. And the Alter Rebbe gives the example. If you look at a brick wall that falls, the bricks that fall the furthest are the bricks that were the highest on the wall. So similarly, Eisav has actually a higher spiritual source. The Alter refers to it as Elam HaTohu, the world of Tohu, right? In the very beginning of creation, Hashem says the world was Tohu Uvohu. In Hasidus, it explains that before this actual physical world came into being, there was another world, the world of Tohu, with intense divine lights. And that world was too fragile, and that world shattered. And sparks of that world then came into this world, the world of tikkun, the world of rectification. And Esav's soul was rooted in the world of Tohu, and Yaakov's was the world of tikkun. So Eisav actually has a higher spiritual source, which is why he fell so far. Again, the greater the godly soul, the greater the root of the godly soul, the greater the power of the godly soul, the greater the animal soul. Hashem balances out within us. So Eisav gave up the fight. He was miyayish. He gave up. And the Torah tells us this. I'm going to die. What's the purpose of it all? What's the purpose of this battle? What's the purpose of this life? If at the end I'm just going to die, let me enjoy myself. What am I striving for? Self-restraint and self-elevation and refinement and rectification. I want to eat. I want to drink. I want to enjoy. I don't want this battle. I don't want this Aveda. And when Yaakov sees that Eisav's giving up, when Yaakov sees that Eisav's miyayish, Yaakov realizes he has to be both. He has to be the tzaddik gomer and the struggler. He has to be both for Klal Yisrael because Eisav's not playing his role. So he tells Eisav, sell me the bechor. And you know what happens from that point on? Look at the story, how it plays itself out. It's fascinating. From before this point, Yaakov's life is total tranquility. Yeshiv oil, learning, davening, meditating, embedded in Kedusha. From this point on, when he tells Eisav, sell me the bechor, I want the bechor, I'll take it. I'll take the Avodas Birurim. I'll take the struggler as well. I'll be the struggler as well. From this point on, Yaakov literally struggles to the end of his life. Look at the stories. He struggles with Eisav, who gets upset with him, who wants to kill him because he took the Brochos, because he took the bechor. Then he struggles with Lavan, then Dinah, then Ruvain, then Yehuda, then the story with Yosef, then Mitzrayim. It's not until the last few years of Yaakov's life that he has tranquility again. From the rest of his life, from this point in our Parsha on, Yaakov struggles. Why? Why was the first half of his life, a little bit less than half of his life, the first 63 years, I think Yaakov lived to be, 147, so a little bit less than half his life. But the first half, his life is tranquil, peaceful. And the second half, once he takes the bechor from Eisav, he takes on the struggler. And in fact, he goes through one struggle after the other, one battle after the other. And we even see it in his name change. Before this, he was Eisav. Eisav is the end. The end is the tachlis, the purpose of it all. Yaakov was an example for that. But then his name is changed to Yisrael right after this. What is Yisrael? You battle, you wrestle with God and man. Yaakov is a battler now. He's a wrestler now. Yisrael is also Liroish, the head, the beginning of the Avodas Birurim. So then change in name it exemplifies this idea as well. Yaakov goes from being the perfect tzaddik to being both of them. And so it wasn't that Yitzchak was fooled. It wasn't that Yitzchak didn't understand the natures of his children. He understood them perfectly. And he never wanted to give up on Eisav. He refused to give up on Eisav. Yes, Eisav had a big Yetzer Hara. Yes, Eisav engaged in all kinds of negative behavior, but through it all, he saw the incredible potential, and he never stopped seeing the incredible potential in his son, to the extent that he wanted his son to be the leader of the Jewish people, at least to share that leadership, and in fact, to be the example for the vast majority of us. He never gave up on his son. And perhaps that's the lesson. If we see the story through those lenses, perhaps that's the lesson in our Parsha. Perhaps the lesson is a twofold lesson. Number one, we're the strugglers. We're the Eisav, so to speak. We're the strugglers. And sometimes the struggle feels overwhelming. And whether it's a struggle in my Avodas Hashem, a struggle in my relationships, a struggle in financially, a struggle in health, all the struggles that we go through. We see Yaakov went through a myriad of different struggles once he took on the job of Eisav. But the Parsha is teaching us that the struggle is profound, that the struggle is not for no purpose, that every struggle that Yaakov went through was part of this refinement that the Beinoni goes through, that the struggler goes through. And Yaakov going through it and overcoming it gives every one of us the power to do the same. Maisa avasim and labanim. But the fatal flaw comes, as Eisav did, when we give up. I can't struggle anymore. I just succumb to my animalistic, selfish perspective and give in. And that's the fatal flaw. It didn't only affect Eisav. It affected his children and his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. They no longer were part of the legacy of Klal Yisrael. They were supposed to be, but he gave up the struggle. And so the message for us is don't give up the struggle. But even more importantly, I think there's even a more powerful lesson. And that is how Yitzchak saw his child, that he never gave up on his child. He knew exactly, wasn't fooled for a minute. He knew exactly who his child was. But Yitzchak teaches us something about the struggling children that we may be dealing with in our own families. Oftentimes, those children who struggle, like Eisav, so to speak, are the children who have the loftiest neshamas, are the children that are the most sensitive, the most holy, and have the most potential. And we give up on them sometimes. It's enough. And we get frustrated, and we feel hurt, and we feel angry. After all, they're veering from the path that we raised them in. How could they do this? But remember, the greater the nefesh elokis, the greater the nefesh Bahamas, the greater the struggle. But it's incumbent upon us, and this is what this parsha teaches us. The foundations of the Jewish family are this parsha. Don't give up on the child who struggles. That child has the greatest potential. You know, I saw in a sefer called Divrei Meir. That was what you printed out. The Divrei Meir is a sefer from Reb Meir of Premishlan. Meir of Premishlan was one of the great Hasidic masters in the first part of the 1800s. I think he passed away in 1850, and he was a Baal Mephis and made many miracles, and a great Hasidic master and Hasidic Rebbe in his own right. And he has a sefer on Chumash, and in Parshas Toldos he tells a fascinating story. Of all the Parshas, he chooses this. And this is why. But he tells the story. He says he heard this from a colleague of his about that colleague's Rebbe, who's a Chaim of Chernovitz, the Be'er Mayim Chaim, who was one of the great early Hasidic masters, lived in the second half of the 1700s. And the Be'er Mayim Chaim of Chernovitz, Chaim Shriver, I think his name was, a tremendous tzaddik, great Hasidic leader. And this Chaim of Chernovitz had a child who went off the derech, who was no longer religious, no longer frum. And in the late 1700s, when a child went off the derech, it was basically, parents sat shiva. It wasn't like today. It wasn't accepted and embraced as we have learned more and we try to do today. We don't give up on those children. But in the 1700s, when a child left the derech, basically the child left the home. But Reb Chaim refused to give up on his child. And so the mayor of Premishlan tells the story that he heard from his colleague that every day when Reb Chaim would daven, that before his davening, before his shachris, before his tefillah, he would say a tefillah katsar. He would daven to Hashem as follows. And he would say, basically, and I'm paraphrasing, that I have a child who has gone off the derech, who's no longer on the derech hayashar. He's no longer on the straight path. He's not religious any longer. And yet you see Hashem. My love for my child has not diminished. I love him. I embrace him. I support him. I give him clothes to wear, the finest clothes. I give him whatever he needs physically, whatever he needs emotionally, whatever he needs spiritually. I am there for him and I have not given up on him. So Hashem, I am but a flesh and blood human being, he says. You are Avinu Shebashamayim. If I haven't given up on my child, even though he may have disappointed me, don't give up on your children, Hashem, even though they may have disappointed you. And he would say this tefillah every day. How powerful is that? And the Divrei Chaim goes further. And he says, where do we see this in our own Tanakh? We see this by Yitzchak Avinu. He says there's a Gemara in Masechtas Shabbos, Daf Pei Testament Beis, where the Gemara says La'asid Lavai. I guess this is right before Mashiach comes. Hashem is going to come to the Avos and tell them, your children have sinned. Mashiach can come, but your children have sinned. What should I do with them? So the Gemara tells us that Hashem comes to Avram Avinu. I think I told this story once many years ago here. It's a Gemara. But Hashem comes to Avram Avinu, and Avram Avinu says, if they sin, then punish them. Punish them. Hashem didn't like that answer. So Hashem goes to Yaakov Avinu, maybe the youth, Yaakov Avinu, the grandson will have the answer. He goes to Yaakov. Yaakov says, Im chatu yimchula. If they've sinned, punish them, demolish them, destroy them. And Hashem comes to Yitzchak. The paragon of Gevura. Hashem comes to Yitzchak, and Yitzchak is the one who defends us. And Yitzchak goes through a whole defense of us. After all, how long does a man live? Half his time he spends sleeping. The other half of the time while he's awake, he's engaged in his own physical needs, etc. So how much time does he sin already? So whatever sins he has, Hashem, you can take upon yourself. And if you don't take upon them yourself, I'll take half and you take half. And if you won't take, I'll take them all myself, Yitzchak says. But send Mashiach now. I'll take all their sins upon myself. And the Gemara concludes, that's why when Mashiach comes, we will say, Avinu Ata. We'll point to Yitzchak and say, Avinu Ata. You are our father. You're the one who defended us. So, says the Divrei Meir, why Yitzchak? Why is Yitzchak the one who defends us? Avram is the paragon of Chesed. Yaakov is the father. We're all Bnei Yisrael. We're all the children of Yaakov. Why is Yitzchak the one who defends us? Because Yitzchak understood what it meant to have a child who left the derech, to have a child who disappointed him, and never stopped loving him, never stopped supporting him, never stopped being there for him. Yitzchak has the moral credibility. And so says the Divrei Meir, perhaps this is what it means. Yitzchak, v'erev Yitzchak es Eisav, ki tzayid b'fiv. Because his trappings were in his mouth. It doesn't mean that because Eisav fed him steaks. What it means is that because Yitzchak has the moral credibility to love a child who disappointed him, who left the path, Yitzchak is able to convince Hashem to love us, to trap, quote unquote, Hashem into loving us. Because we know that Hashem established the world in a way, as the Zohar says, as Srusa de Lasata, as Srusa de Le'ela. Hashem responds, reacts to our actions. When there's an arousal from below, that triggers a similar arousal from below. If we want Hashem to bestow chesed upon us, we bestow chesed upon others. That triggers the Hashem's chesed upon us. Similarly, if we want Hashem to love us, even though we may have disappointed him, even though we may not have been perfect, we have to be that example to love our children, even if they are not perfect, even if they have gone off the derech. And by doing that, we trigger Hashem to respond in the same manner. Ki tzayid b'piv, by Eisav, by Yitzchak constantly showing his love and expressing that love, b'piv, ki tzayid, he was able to trap, so to speak, Hashem into loving us. That's what ki tzayid b'piv means. So it says, Yitzchak, because, Yitzchak es Eisav. Yitzchak loved Eisav. And we translate ki tzai b'piv, because. Ki doesn't only mean because. Ki could be translated as therefore. Therefore, tzayid b'piv. He was able to trap Hashem, so to speak, with his mouth, with his words of love to his son, into loving us. That's what ki tzai b'piv means. And you may think, what was all this love worth? What was all this love worth? After all, did Eisav ever do tshuva? Perhaps not. So was all that love worthless? But we know it wasn't. We know going into next week's Parsha, when Eliphaz comes to kill Yaakov, right? Eisav sends his firstborn son Eliphaz to go murder Yaakov. And Eliphaz reaches Yaakov. And he doesn't kill him. He takes all his money. Yaakov convinces, take all my money. Ani chashav kameis. A poor person's considered like a mace. And this way you'll be able to fulfill your father's directives without actually murdering me. And Eliphaz takes Yaakov's advice, takes his money. And that's one of the reasons when Yaakov meets Rachel, Yaakov cries. One of the reasons he cries is because he has no money. Why doesn't he have any money? Eliphaz took it. And Rashi explains, now, who was this Eliphaz? Eliphaz was Esav's Bechor. Eliphaz was a Rasha Gomer. He was all the rishas of Eisav without any of the good. Just to picture who Eliphaz is, Eliphaz was intimate with his own daughter, and from there, the child was a Molech. That's where a Molech comes from the incestuous relationship between Eliphaz and his daughter. So Eliphaz was an absolute Rasha Gomer. And yet, he didn't murder Yaakov. Why not? And Rashi says, and it's a powerful Rashi that I think we should stress, and this Rashi should be highlighted. Lefi shegadol b'cheko shel Yitzchak mashech yadai. Says Rashi, because he grew up in the lap, because Eliphaz grew up in the lap of Yitzchak. And Rashi uses that language, the lap of Yitzchak. Eliphaz was Yitzchak's grandson. Yitzchak knew who he was. Yitzchak understood his character, but he grew up in Yitzchak's lap. Yitzchak loved him. And because of that love, he could not kill Yaakov. And we are all here today because of that love. The love of a parent to a wayward child is never, ever wasted. Just like a tefillah, we daven for people, and sometimes we daven for people, and it doesn't turn out how we want it. No tefillah is ever wasted. The power of that tefillah went to somebody else's refuah. Hashem had bigger plans, other plans that we may not fathom, but your tefillah is never gone. The love that you give to your children and the love that you give to your grandchildren, not just those who are on the derech hayasher, not just those who it's easy to love, specifically those who it's more difficult to love. That love, and this is what the Torah is teaching us. This is the power of this parsha and the power of this lesson. And it extends itself to next week's lesson, to next week's parsha, to the story of Eliphaz. Eliphaz, Yaakov Avinu's life is saved because of the love of Yitzchak to his grandson. And so that's maybe perhaps the underlying message here and the underlying explanation of this Yitzchak and Rivka dispute over who gets the brachas. Ultimately, Rivka was the greater Navi, as Sarah was a greater Naviya than Avram was, and saw that Yaakov was meant to be both. But Yitzchak's kavana, Yitzchak's intention, wasn't a foolish, doddering old man who didn't know his son. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew exactly why he wanted to give the brachas to Eisav, and he never gave up on his child, and he never gave up on his grandchild. And that love is ultimately why we are all here today, why Yaakov's life is spared. So in Mirz Hashem, we will learn the lesson of Eliphaz, the lesson of Eisav, the lesson that Yitzchak Avinu teaches us. And that's perhaps why Yitzchak is the one who saves us. La'asid lavoy. Yitzchak has the moral credibility to be the one to say, Hashem, show them only love and bring them Mashiach. And so in Mirz Hashem, through imbuing this lesson within ourselves, through loving our children, especially those who have gone off the derech hayasher, through showing them love and only showing them love and support, Mirz Hashem, we will have that same moral credibility when Mashiach comes, and that love itself will ultimately be the one, what compels Mashiach to come, as Yitzchak Avinu says. And Mirz Hashem, we should be zeicha that as we show love to those who are not easy to love, may Hashem show love to all of us. And as great as our love is, may Hashem respond in kind and show us the greatest love, the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'mheira B'yameinu Amen. Okay, so let's do Tehillim 121.